So as humans, we are the highest of the high as far as evolution is concerned. And unfortunately, as humans, sometimes we tend to only think about ourselves. As you know, humans are incredibly selfish beings, and most creatures are because, they want to survive, this whole idea of natural selection. But as humans who have the ability to reason and problem solve and create, you know that we have basically altered evolution and we are changing the environment. And most of the time, not for the best. So as humans, we do depend on the Earth's products, and unfortunately, we have altered the Earth's landscape since our evolution. Most humans, or excuse me, not most humans, as humans, we began our ancestors as hunters and gatherers. And so they would go hunting for their food, they would gather their food, and over time, this has caused some extinctions. For example, the dodo bird has gone extinct within human lifetime. The woolly mammoth has gone extinct. The American buffalo, the homing pigeon, all of these different creatures have gone extinct simply because they have been out hunted. If humans were not around, these creatures would not have gone extinct. We have altered evolution in order to allow ourselves to survive. Well, at some point in time, our ancestors became an agricultural society. They stopped moving around because hunters and gatherers are nomads. They will go from area to area depending on the season in order to get the food supply that they need. But at some point in time, our ancestors learned how to farm. And this caused us to become an agricultural society. And this allowed for population growth and for civilizations to form. Well, you're like, okay, well, why is that a bad thing? Well, that led to areas of deforestation, where we would go in and just cut down entire areas, which would then cause creatures to lose their habitat. And again, something as simple as farming can cause different creatures to go extinct. We were an agricultural society for quite some time. And eventually, we became very creative and we learned to make machines. So we became an industrial society, which causes a whole other group of problems. Because for industrial growth and urban development, this creates pollution that does not normally exist in the world. Okay? So for example, we built all these factories and we have all of these chemicals going up into the air that are not natural. And so therefore that is going to cause different types of pollution. It's going to kill off certain things. These are things that would not have died if it weren't for us causing this to happen. So again, this is how humans are changing evolution, and we are basically destroying things that would have been very happy living in the environment that we have. Something as simple as soap. Soap is not a natural chemical, and anytime you take a shower or you wash clothes or whatever, you put soap into our water system. Well, again, soap is not normal, and that is a pollution. And so these different things that we have created in order to make our lives easier are not natural in nature, and it's actually killing off other things. So industrial growth and urban development does create pollution. It uses up a lot of energy, burning of trees, fossil fuels. We're going to run out of these things. And so which leads us to this topic of resources. Okay? Resources are environmental goods or services such as water, air, land, and forest. And you guys all know when you renew something, that means you can just keep checking it out or keep checking it out or keep using it and keep using it. So some, but very few, resources we have in nature are renewable. Renewable resources, as you can see here, regenerate within a short period of time. And in the grand scheme of things, 100 years is a short period of time. This is why a lot of companies are trying to come up with different solar machines. This is why we have these huge solar farms to help create electricity. Luckily for us, the sun rises every day. So every day we have this source of energy that we need to learn how to harvest because it's always going to be there, or at least for the next few millions of years. And so with the renewable, things like the sun or wind power or even currents, ocean power, these are things that are going to happen every day. And if we could figure out a way to take these resources and use them, it will actually help us in the long run. because what we're finding is we're running out of our non-renewable resources. These are things that once they're gone, they're gone. So for example, petroleum, oil, gasoline. This comes from basically the ooze of dead stuff. Okay? We've had hundreds of thousands of years of stuff dying on Earth. And when stuff dies, it biodegrades. And when it biodegrades, it leaves basically this ooze. And this ooze is petroleum. Well, we've had 100,000 of years of things dying to create this petroleum. And we're using it incredibly fast. That's why, for example, gas prices are constantly going up. Okay? I remember when I was a teenager, I could go to the gas station and get a gallon of gas for less than $1. I mean, I can remember going to the gas station and gas only being 78 cents a gallon. Nowadays, I think as of right now, it's about $2.55 a gallon. And unfortunately, in your lifetime and your children's lifetime, the price of gas is just going to keep going up and up and up and up because we are running out of it. So we have to come up with another way to basically fuel our cars. We need solar energy, we need electric energy, we need wind energy. So we need to come up with renewable resources that we can use in order to make our lives more comfortable. So for the future, we need to do something along the lines of sustainable development. Okay? These are ways to use resources without depleting or degrading them so that they're available for future generations. So again, solar energy. As long as that sun burns, we are not going to run out of solar energy. So this would be an excellent source. You know, if we could get cars to run on solar energy. You know, a lot of people now have solar panels in their house. It helps heat their waters. It helps run the electricity. Okay? Or, you know, we build a lot of furniture with wood. Well, it takes hundreds of years for trees to grow. And a lot of real expensive pieces of furniture are made from things like oak, mahogany, cherry. These are trees that are hundreds of years old when they are cut down in order to build this furniture. And so what if we kind of shift towards a sustainable development, a renewable resource? Things like bamboo, wicker furniture. Okay. Wicker bamboo grows really fast. And we can genetically alter it to actually make it incredibly strong. So wicker and bamboo, things like that, they're not actually trees. They're basically like a really tall, really strong grass. And they grow really fast. So if we could start doing things like wicker furniture or bamboo furniture, this is wood or grass products that once we cut them down, we can replant and they actually grow back fairly quickly. So keep in mind that the greater the biodiversity, the healthier the ecosystem is. Two of the most biodiverse areas on Earth are the tropical rainforest and the great coral reefs. The problem is both of these are in severe danger. The tropical rainforest is being deforested. People are going in and cutting down the tropical rainforest in order to have farm areas. And this is killing creatures that we probably don't even know exist. The barrier reefs are dying. It takes hundreds of years for coral to form these reefs. And unfortunately, they are dying from the pollutions that we're putting in the water. And as humans, we're like, oh, that's not a big deal because it's not going to affect me, or it's not going to affect our children. For some reason, we tend to think, oh, 100 years from now, if this stuff doesn't exist, no big deal because it doesn't bother me. We need to get out of that mind shift. We need to stop thinking about me and start thinking about us. Okay? So what if the coral reef dies? I'll be dead by then. My kids will be dead by then. No big deal. We need to get away from that mindset and start thinking about humans and the world all in all. Because what we are doing is we're causing what's called habitat destruction. Remember, habitat is where a creature lives in the environment. And with habitat destruction, we're decreasing the quality or quantity of natural areas. Okay? So like I said, people who go in and cut down forests in order to build housing communities, okay? You are taking away areas for creatures to live. And they can starve to death, or you have increased competition, and they actually fight each other, and they kill each other. We are causing deforestation, where we are cutting down forests in order to create fields or to have the lumber needed to make things like paper, which is why it's so important not to waste paper. All year long, we've been tearing and sharing, or we've been using scrap paper. Or I post something on Google Classroom so I don't have to make copies for you. This is why we recycle paper, so we don't have to keep cutting down trees. So yes, it costs a little bit more, but in the grand scheme of things, we are saving our environment. Pesticides are also another huge problem that we have. We create pesticides in order to kill insects. Remember, those insects are supposed to be there. If they weren't supposed to be there, nature would have gotten rid of them itself. We're supposed to have insects. Insects are an important part of the food chain. But as humans, we don't like them. And unfortunately, things that we don't like, we tend to get rid of. And so pesticides are any chemicals that poison pests. The problem is they're chemicals, and they're not natural chemicals. So we spray these pesticides on our plants to stop the insects from eating them, or we spray these pesticides on our bodies to keep the insects from biting us, and then it rains or we take a shower, and those pesticides just get washed out. Or the plant absorbs those pesticides, and when the plant dies, those pesticides are now leached into the ground. Well, this creates an incredibly serious problem that's called bioaccumulation or biomagnification. And the Amoeba Sisters have an excellent video that explains this. But in the case of bio, meaning life, when you accumulate something, you gather it, or when you magnify something, you know you get more. Well, a lady, her name was Rachel Carson, wrote a book called The Silent Spring. And Rachel Carson basically is the person who coined this term bioaccumulation or biomagnification. And she studied the chemical called DDT. DDT is a very popular mosquito repellent. Back in the day, you would literally have these trucks go down through your neighborhood just spraying this pesticide, which was DDT. It is incredibly effective in killing mosquitoes. But what people were finding is that at the same time, bald eagles, which as you know are on the endangered species list, they were not having babies like they should. And so when a bald eagle would lay her eggs, and she'd sit on her eggs but they'd never hatch, scientists would then go and gather those eggs and crack them open. And they found grossly malformed baby birds, or birds that, their brains didn't form correctly, or birds whose organs formed outside of their bodies. And upon taking tissue samples, they had incredibly large amounts of DDT showing up in their tissue samples. But they live in areas where mosquitoes weren't sprayed for. Well, what we found, again, with Rachel Carson and her book, The Silent Spring, came up with this idea of biomagnification. We would spray pesticides, and pesticides would get into our water system. And then things like algae would absorb those pesticides. And then when an algae-eating creature would eat the algae, it would also absorb. But let's just say each algae is like a penny. So each algae just has 1 cent worth of chemical. But then this mayfly nymph comes along and eats 10 pieces of algae. Now that one creature has 10 cents worth of pesticide inside of it. And then the sunfish comes along and eats 10 mayfly nymphs. Now this sunfish has $1 worth of DDT. And so it keeps going up and going up and going up until you get to the top of the food chain, which is what things like herons or eagles were. So by the time the eagles eat all these fish, which have eaten all these other fish, which have eaten all these other fish, the amount of chemicals have magnified. And it was causing gross birth defects in these creatures. So DDT has been outlawed or banned in the United States. However, it is very inexpensive to make, and it does kill mosquitoes very well. So there are a lot of third world countries that still use DDT. But of course, we cannot determine what other countries say can or cannot be done. We're also having a huge problem with acid rain. And acid rain is just what the name says. Acid rain is where you have factories or cars giving off certain chemicals, and those chemicals go up in the atmosphere and they mix with the clouds, and so when it rains, these chemicals come right back down to Earth. So things like sulfuric acid, sulfuric dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, forms sulfuric acid and nitrogen and nitric acid. And so it literally rains down acid. What you're seeing here in this picture is this is a forest in Canada, and this is not caused by a forest fire. This is caused from acid rain. The United States government every year has to pay Canada millions, almost billions of dollars, because think about where all of our factories are. Our factories are in areas such as Gary, Indiana, Pittsburgh, Detroit. Well, due to the jet stream, a lot of the pollutants that come off these factories then get pushed up into Canada. And so when it rains in Canada, we have acid rain. And so this acid rain are killing the forest in areas such as Canada, and Alaska, parts of Maine. And so we actually have to pay Canada money each year in order to replace the trees. So a lot of you don't have jobs yet, but when you become a taxpayer, some of the taxes that you work very hard, your money that you work very hard to make, and then you have to turn around and pay in taxes, some of that money is going to a foreign country in order to allow them to replant the plants that these pollutants are killing. Down here you see an example of a cemetery monument. The one on the left is what the one on the right is supposed to look like. But just to give you an idea, this monument, this picture, was taken in an area of Newfoundland, and it's only 20 years later. There's been so much acid rain in this area that in 20 years, that acid has eaten away that cemetery monument. So acid rain is a big deal. And again, I mentioned deforestation. Deforestation is when people go in and they basically cut down the trees, and a lot of times it's in good intentions. It's to build farms, but at the same time, it's to get that lumber, to make paper, to make furniture. And just so you have an idea, this picture is the same area with just about a 50-year time difference. So the top picture here shows the forest. You can see some roads, and they do have some fields. But over time, they have deforested it, and you can see the city that has built up behind it. And there's been so much deforestation that they've actually turned this area into a desert-like region. And without trees and plants, you have huge amounts of soil erosion, as you can see in the second picture. And this actually causes mudslides to occur in the town. Now, at the same time, humans also have what are called invasive species or exotic species. Invasive species are basically creatures that aren't supposed to be there. So, for example, when people travel, when the settlers first came over from Europe, when they brought over the supplies they thought they needed, they brought over plants and animals that were native to their land. However, they're not native to our land, and so they basically kind of take over. And the classic example is the mongoose. Hawaii has a very large problem with rodents. They have a very large problem with rats and mice. They're an island. There's no place for these rats or mice to go. And it's actually a very heavily populated island, so there is a lot of trash. And so rats and mice, gravitate towards that, and if they have the food, they can reproduce very rapidly. Well, Hawaii has this very, very large problem. And I don't know who came up with this idea, but somebody decided to bring in mongoose. And they said, oh, the mongoose would eat the rats. Well, as you can see here, the mongoose are diurnal, which as you know means they are active during the day, and rats are nocturnal. So now not only does Hawaii have a problem with rats, Hawaii also has a problem with the mongoose. Because mongoose is not a native species, there is nothing in Hawaii that eats the mongoose. So there's nothing to prey on the mongoose, so they just reproduce. And they're starting to take over the ecosystems. Things that are supposed to live there are slowly dying out because the mongoose has taken over. Another exotic species that you're all familiar with is the kudzu. This is very familiar picture here in North Carolina, specifically in the south. The kudzu is actually from Spain. And what probably happened when Spanish explorers were bringing supplies over, some kudzu seeds were mixed in with their stuff. And over time, kudzu has taken over the South. Well, there are no insects in North Carolina or South Carolina or most of the South that eat kudzu. So kudzu literally just takes over, and it grows on top of other plants, and it kind of acts as a parasite. It will take nutrients from those other plants, it'll block the sunlight from those other plants, and those other plants do die out. In the case of Australia, they have a big problem with cane toads. Cane toads are believed to have been brought to Australia by collectors, people who collected them as pets, or people who collected reptiles. And cane toads get pretty large. And so either these cane toads escaped, or the collectors no longer wanted these large toads and let them loose, and there's nothing in Australia that eats the cane toads. And so they have multiplied and bred and have caused several different types of insects and other things that eat those insects to begin to die out and become very close to extinction. Another big problem that we're having is climate change. We know that climate change is happening. And with climate change, the Earth is heating up. And we have what's called the greenhouse effect. Now we have our layer of UV light, and that UV light, that area of what we call the ozone layer. And the ozone layer is basically the suntan lotion of the Earth. The sun, as you know, heats up our atmosphere. Well, due to all of the pollution we have in our atmosphere, it's like we've added an extra layer of blanket on top. Things like carbon dioxide, pollutants given off by factories, something called CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, which are no longer allowed to be used. These gases are not natural to our atmosphere. Humans have made these gases. Carbon dioxide is normal, yes, but not in the amounts that we're making it. And so these extra layers of gas in our atmosphere is kind of like laying blanket after blanket after blanket on our atmosphere. So the world is getting hotter. And as you know, this is causing what we now call global warming. And global warming goes hand in hand with the greenhouse effect. Okay. Global warming is because of the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect is this idea that these layers of gases form these blankets. So heat gets trapped, which in turn causes global warming. And global warming, as you know, is when the world is getting warmer. And just so you can see from this picture, just within my lifetime, I know you guys weren't born in 1979, but you can see this is a satellite view. You've got Alaska down in the lower left-hand corner, and this was the polar ice caps. And you can see in less than 30 years how much it has melted. Well, that water's got to go somewhere. So, within the next, I can't say how many years, hundreds of years, New York City, parts of New York City is going to be underwater. Look at Venice. Venice is underwater, and it continues to sink. Those water levels continue to rise. So we do have global warming. These are just some graphs showing how much temperatures have changed over certain amounts of time. Okay. Now, another reason for global warming is what we call ozone depletion. Now, ozone depletion is what you might think of as having a hole in the ozone. Well, there is no such thing as an ozone hole. Okay? There is an ozone thinning. Okay? Ozone, which is O3, is basically the suntan lotion that we have around the Earth. Okay? Ozone is a layer that we have in our atmosphere. It's created from lightning. Oxygen is O2, and when oxygen is electrified, it causes a bonding, and we get O3, which is ozone. That's why you might have heard people say, oh, I smell a storm coming, because when lightning hits, you create ozone, and you can actually smell that. Well, ozone is there to basically have suntan lotion for the Earth. Well, there's really no such thing as an ozone hole, because if there's a true hole there, whatever is beneath that hole would be burned away. We do have an ozone thinning. And so that is, they talk about how this is why we have more, we have an increase in different types of skin cancers and different types of electrical malfunctions. But with ozone depletion, again, this is also going to lead to global warming. One cause of ozone depletion, again, is release of CFCs, which are chlorofluorocarbons. These were used in factories. It used to be used in air conditioning. For those of you who might know Freon, Freon is no longer available because it is basically illegal. It does call, I don't say illegal, but we're not allowed to use it anymore. So once Freon is gone, you can't get it anymore. It used to be used in aerosols, deodorants, hairsprays. Those are aerosols, but they're made now that they don't have chlorofluorocarbons in them because it does cause a depletion of the ozone, which just